Hi, everyone. Welcome to Accessibility Talks for November 2018. Today's guest is Liz Davis. She's going to talk about practical ways to include people with disabilities. And one of Liz's superpowers is that she is an arm wrestling champion of the world. Is that correct?
Oh, the entire world, yes.
So tell us a little bit about what you do in your spare time besides the arm wrestling.
I'm a UX designer here in Chicago. We work on e-commerce software, nothing too terribly exciting or accessible, but we're working on it. At night, I am in a master's program to get my degree in HCI, which is human-computer interaction, which is what we called UX before it became UX. And I do lots of different things around the community when I can, and just literally like random things like arm wrestling. So
You're random, and you host a group in your graduate program where you have people come in
oh
and speak because that's how
yeah,
we met.
XD
Or
roundtable.
yeah, and that's a lot of fun too because you get to incorporate some of the things that you're learning in class and seeing how
Yeah,
it's being applied to the real
yeah,
world.
and actually, with the connection with the Field Museum here in Chicago, we're gonna be doing an event with them.
Oh,
uh
that's
I
cool.
got a connection with a woman who does like audience engagement and a lot of UX. They have like I got to do an accessibility consult there at the Field Museum for their new Sue exhibit, which is going to be a big deal when it comes out because Chicago loves Sue the dinosaur. And also the what she's they have a lot of interactive exhibits like games or tablets or kiosks, and so they actually have some analytics on those and are able to track engagement and uh, UX from that. And then I'm kind of helping consult about accessibility with there as well.
Oh, that's really amazing. Can
Yeah,
you let
it's
us
fun.
know when we can come down and see these things?
Yeah, I think Sue, because there was a big controversy in Chicago here where they moved Sue. If you don't know, Sue is a T Rex
Yep.
who is very famous in Chicago. And she was in the big atrium of the Field Museum, but they decided, I think early this year, to move her to her own room.
Mhm.
And she seems a lot bigger there. I got a sneak peek at the room too, and she seems a lot bigger. And they put another dinosaur, Maximo, who is absolutely adorable. He's like a long neck, from Land Before Time.
Yeah.
His face is so cute. I love it. And he's in the atrium now, and he's even bigger than Sue. So, but when Sue went away, everyone freaked out because they wanted to see Sue. People come to see Sue. And
Mhm.
they had to actually open a window into the construction unit because people were so mad that Sue was gone. So,
That's a good story. Well, definitely,
big deal.
definitely a little off topic, but very exciting the things that you're doing, Liz. So thanks for
Yes.
sharing. But I'm going to be quiet now and let you do your presentation. And at
Okay.
the end, hopefully, we have some questions from people.
So, today we're going to talk about practical ways for getting everything out of my screen here. This is more complicated than I thought. There we go. All right. So, practical ways to include people with disabilities. I gave a talk at a camp here in Chicago about uh, including people with disabilities in the process, but a lot of feedback I got was people don't really know what actual strategies to do. So, this is kind of based off of that. And I have a little fun here, so I hope everyone has the same fun. All right, so this is me, a short introduction. You can find me on Twitter. It's what I do. This is a picture of me at the Women's March. Feel free to email me. Uh, so now we're gonna talk about being inclusive. So everyone knows it's cool to be inclusive. Everyone, it says the dog here, Everyone knows that you need to be inclusive, but a lot of people are confused about how. You want to be inclusive. You want to start reaching out to the disability community. You want to make sure your product is accessible, but you're asking yourself, like this dog trying to do science, how do I do that and where do I start? Maybe you don't know anybody with a disability. Maybe you have never even met someone with a disability, which you probably have, you just don't realize it. So, next, lucky for you, the network you need already exists. So, we got our happy dog. His ears are, bouncing up because he's running happily. So the awesome thing about the disability community is it's often already connected. There's a lot of base organizations you can start with, government-wise or social media-wise, and the first thing you need to do is make that connection. So here's a good list of organizations that you can search for in your local area. A lot of my insider information is Chicago-based, which is a huge metropolitan city, but I would be shocked if there's not some sort of organization around you, even in a different country. So I'm going to list these off real quick, and then we'll get into each more in depth. So first one is independent living organizations. This nickel, the national, can't remember the acronym now, I should put it on here, but the independent living organizations are around the country of the USA. And in Canada, they also have some, and I have that later. So if you're Canadian, we have the resource for you. So the independent living organizations are a great place to start because they're often run by people with disabilities, and they also have good access into the resources of the community. You can look at university disability organizations, local disability organizations, whether they're in this town or their advocacy or their specific disability. You can look at senior centers and other active disability advocacy groups. So we have like ADAPT, or just a local grassroots organization. And then of course we have social media groups. So we're going to start with independent living centers. So I give you a map of how prevalent these independent living centers are just in Illinois. If you look around, there is one for every county in the state. And that is a great resource to tap into. And if you want to look for more, there's a map down there. And like I said before, every state has one office, if not multiple offices. And there's a handy map at the bottom here. You can find these offices around. So connect with these. They'd be more than happy to at least help you know where to start. And if you're in Canada, we also have the Independent Living Canada. I'm not sure how prevalent those are necessarily, but go to their website and it's easy to look it up. So this is a little bit about what they offer and how that is helpful for you as a designer, as a UX person, as a developer when trying to tap into that community. So they offer advocacy. Usually, I know Access Living in Chicago is very active in the political sphere, and a lot of these independent living centers are. Depends on their resources and their location typically, but they are a good resource to start with. They offer technical training or help with technology. There's specific organizations for people who are blind. I know the Lighthouse in Chicago will teach people how to use screen readers and all sorts of things like that. So knowing where people who are already using this technology are, they might be much more willing to help you out. Let's see, they also teach independent living skills. So how to use the bus system in Chicago, how to contact a paratransit, all sorts of things with someone who's newly injured or maybe just doesn't know the area. They're also an information hub for resources in the area, which is really awesome when you haven't tapped into your community before. They offer community support for those with disabilities, and I forget the metrics, but I think at least half, if not more, have to be staffed by people with disabilities. So it's really a good hub. So university and colleges. So typically universities have an office for people with disabilities. I've had mixed results depending on the college. Some of them, if they're really tapped into the space, will be very helpful and understand the disability community. Some others don't, so I would just be cautious with that. But it's definitely a good way to connect with students who have disabilities. And they can send out an email to their network and say, hey, there's this opportunity. You can earn some gift cards, you can earn some money. And if they're in college, typically they're going to know about these resources already and be able to help you in your usability tests. Social media. It's, a brand new world. I wanted to put a little Landon thing in here, but I didn't quite yet. So social media has opened up a lot of potential for people with disabilities. A lot of support groups. I've met actually a lot of people with my disability through just a Facebook group. It's really good for making connections and really easy to find people out there. Uh, we have YouTube channels now, blogs of people with disabilities, gaming groups online, Twitter communities. If you want to get some solid leads or ideas, engage the disability community online. Find their hashtags, find what groups are open to accepting help or emails or networking. I think you'd be surprised at how willing people are to help, as long as you don't, take advantage of their hospitality. So as our friendly office dog here suggests, first start with sending an email to these organizations. Maybe you send an email to someone on the Independent Living Council in your county and say, hey, we're doing this project. We would love to get your input, and give them all the details and see what happens. So talk about your project, your typical recruitment screeners and information, just like any other participant. So it's very similar, obviously, because disabled people are people too, but we forget or we get worried that somehow it's going to be a different process. But engage them just like you would any other minority group. So now, okay, we've gotten the hard part, right? We found the community. We just need to set up the session. So before we do that, we're going to have a quick history lesson about disability, because the biggest thing I see is people are kind of hesitant or apprehensive engaging the disability community. Like they don't want to say the wrong thing, or they don't know how to engage at all. And so I think understanding the history of the disability rights movement is really going to help you see how amazing this community is and how strong and how much their voice matters to them and to everyone. So we're going to talk about the disability rights movement, civil rights movement. Yeah. So this is a very common theme. There's a picture that says nothing about us without us. It was the tagline for the ADA and the whole civil rights movement. It's a very important quote for the disabled community, that nothing be decided without us, about us, without us in the conversation, without us at the table. And I love that so much. So let's start with one of the founders of the disability rights movement, at least not in the 90s, right before the ADA was passed. We have a pride parade here in New York City, and the quote on the banner says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," by Martin Luther King Jr. And as you can see, we have pride parades too. We get out there and sit in front of buses. So this next image I'm showing is at in the 1978, there was a Denver bus boycott by the Gang of 19, and they were protesting inaccessible buses in the city of Denver. And they literally laid down in front of buses to protest this injustice that they saw. And this image is just incredible to me. It has a bus up on the left, and then there's a group of people laying down in front of the bus on the right, just sleeping away. It looks like they're camping. And then there's a wheelchair off in the distance to the right. And in the bus window, it says free ride, and then a handicap symbol equals no ride. And it says taxation without transportation. So it's a really powerful image to see how rough and tough, how important having a voice is for the disability community. So my next image is Section 504 protesters gathered at the UN Plaza in San Francisco to protest government indifference and insist the 504 regulations be signed. It's a beautiful shot of people in wheelchairs. With one has a sign on his back that says, "We shall overcome." And these are very reminiscent of the civil rights movement, in general. And to see these with people in wheelchairs, I think is really powerful to know that this struggle also happened for us. And then this next image is from the Capitol Crawl, which, if you are curious, just YouTube the Capitol Crawl for the ADA. And when it looked like no one was going to vote on the bill, protesters from ADAPT literally crawled up the stairs of the Capitol building in DC to get that bill passed. And this picture is a young girl, I believe her name's Amanda. She's probably about like 10 or 11 at the time, and she has a bandana with the ADAPT logo on it, and she's crawling up the stairs, inconveniencing these senators just so that they would sign a bill that would help her be independent in the world. It's a really powerful photo. And, all that stuff was in the past. We think of that as being done. I have students that I run into that are like, oh yeah, isn't everything accessible now? We did that in the 90s, right? Yeah. No. So this is from last year. Do you remember when they were trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act? If you didn't know, the protesters from ADAPT were pretty instrumental in saving that law. And this image is a woman in a wheelchair, Stephanie Woodward, being arrested during a die-in outside Mitch McConnell's DC office to protest cuts to Medicaid and repeal the ACA. And what's amazing about this image is her hands are bound in the zip ties tied behind her wheelchair. And it's just amazing to me that we still have to fight this fight, and how strong these protesters have to be to just get basic health care. And so, this community has gone through a lot, and it's a strong community, and I don't think you have to worry as much about, saying the wrong thing or just avoiding including people just because you think that maybe they don't want to, or maybe you'll offend them somehow. It's a strong community who wants their voice in the issues. So, here, what I just said. People with disabilities want a voice, and giving insights into technology that affects them every day is powerful. I think you'd be surprised at how willing people with disabilities are to help you and consult with you on your technology or project or anything. So now we've had our history lesson. Now we have to set up the actual session, which can have its logistics, but what usability test doesn't have logistics nightmares? So first thing, these are some things to consider when having someone with a disability in your session. It is, depending on the building and where you are, can be a little more cumbersome, or just needs more planning, pretty much. You need to dot your I's and cross your T's. So you're going to consider location first. You're going to consider public transit or paratransit. So in Chicago, is it close to an L stop? Is it close to a bus stop? Is there a parking lot that's accessible and doesn't cost money? If you're outside the city, just, is it there a parking lot nearby? Is it easily accessed from the highway? Anything like that. Is the building accessible? Don't assume it's accessible just because they have a ramp. Don't assume that the ramp works, or that the lift works, or that they can get in. You need to double check everything for that. If they're using a wheelchair, make sure the ramp doesn't go through the restaurant area. Make sure the elevator is functioning most of the time, or who has the key. I've gone into restaurants where they have an elevator, but they have never used it, and so they have no idea where the key even is. And those are things you need to consider, especially if you have someone who's in a wheelchair coming to your building. You want to consider timing. Paratransit in some cities can be unreliable at times, or at best of times and worst of times. Consider a good backup plan if the times change. Be flexible. Some people are going to need more time getting there and setting up than others. Some people are going to need help with their technology, or they're going to need help getting it all set up, or they'll just need a little bit of time. Consider what type of assistive tech you'll be using. If you're using your own technology, give them time to be familiar with it, to set it to their settings, their speed, their everything. If they're using their own technology, consider time for them to get connected to your Wi-Fi and get ready to go. You need to be sure that it doesn't cut into actual usability time. This should all be separate. And then just be open and ask about any additional access needs. So you can't account for every single need. So ask what access you need to provide. If you need an interpreter, get an interpreter. If you need a break time in the middle of your session for someone to take their service dog out to go to the bathroom or to eat, they will, if you offer to have a dialogue about the access needs, they will, well, most typically people will be very open to that and will tell you what they need. And then in the middle of it, if something comes up, because things do, just figure out a way to make it work. Be flexible. Don't make anyone feel bad about it, anything like that. Very normal human being things, but I feel they need to be restated here. So next we come to this worried dog looking up, it's a picture of a dog, very cute dog, looking up with a worried look like, he's not sure what to expect. And the caption underneath says, now you're thinking, what if I say the wrong thing? That's what I hear all the time. What if I say the wrong thing? What if I say, see you later to someone who's blind? What if I say, oh, let's just walk this way to someone who's in a wheelchair? Those common casual colloquialisms. And I just want to tell you that it's okay. Cooperate, work together, use that empathy, and don't be afraid to say the wrong thing. People will correct you if it offends them. People will say, hey, maybe you should do it this way, not that way. We're used, I say we, as I am a member of the disabled community, and I say we're used to the strange sort of interactions, and I've never been turned off by it, and I've always understood people when they're trying their best. Intent matters, and you just have to give it a go and understand that you'll learn more as it happens. It might be tough at first. You might be scared. It might be apprehensive. But if you're open to feedback, your intentions are good, and you use that empathy that we all talk about, I think you'll be fine. So another notable thing you should do is post usability test feedback. Maybe someone doesn't want to give you feedback immediately. So send out a survey. Say, hey, what can I do better? Is this a good location for you? Do you think we can improve here or there? How were the bathrooms, kind of thing. That'll give you a lot of feedback without having to have a face-to-face talk as well. And then once we're done with everything, we can say that you did it. You got through your first session of people with disabilities. And it probably wasn't as hard as some user groups you've tested with. Let me tell you, I'm sure. Another thing I should mention that isn't always as obvious for some reason, and I didn't put it in here because I thought it was obvious, but you need to pay people for their time. People with disabilities aren't going to do all the goodness of their hearts. They might do it if they like the technology or whatever, but you need to pay them like you do every other single participant. And I think that's a very important thing to point out that for some reason isn't obvious. So, and with that, that is my talk. Now, Carrie, we can move to questions.
Sounds good. Thank you, Liz, so much.
Yeah.
And just so you know, you're getting paid the same amount as everyone else, which is $0.
Well, that's fine. We know each other. It's okay.
It is. Hopefully we can fix that in the future, but right now we have no budget, so I'll volunteer and just.
Well, I just meant insofar as usability tests.
No, that's a really good point. And that's
Yeah.
actually something that I've been, since you told me about that, and since you started kind of opening my eyes to that conversation and that thought process, now I really push that, especially when I talk with clients and I'm like, first of all, A, do user testing, because some of them don't even do it. And B, if you do, don't just rely, especially if you're spending so much money on like the website development and marketing. I mean, what's another couple $100 to pay to volunteers, right? I mean, really.
Exactly. And I mean, another thing I like to bring up that it wasn't kind of as relevant for this topic was you're probably going to get more value out of a person who uses a screen reader than someone who doesn't. And I think a
Mhm.
lot of us are starting to realize that, I can find problems with a building in like no time just by going through it once. And
It's
those
true.
problems are applicable to people who are elderly, people who use wheelchairs, delivery people. We all know these problems. So,
Mhm. Yeah, and it's true when you're talking about specifically digital accessibility and online kind of accessibility. Um, no matter how much I use the screen reader, even if I use it every day
yeah.
in development, I'm still not a native screen reader user. And so there are things that I'm never going to find. And that's just kind of how it is. And, I'm not an expert user at assistive technologies like that. But so why pay me to do
Yeah,
it when you can pay
it's
an expert
yeah.
to do it? So.
And like you don't want to simulate disability because there's a lot of nuances. I've seen back and forth about the simulation of disability, and I always come to the fact down to the fact that you should just ask someone who has a disability.
Mhm.
You can run your screen reader through it really quick, but it's never going to compare to someone who uses it every day.
That's
So
very true. Well, we have a few questions that came up in Slack,
sure.
and so I wanted to make sure that we could address these. And if anyone, again, has any questions right now, you can either tag us on Twitter or Liz on Twitter as well. I can take a look at those, see if anyone messaged her there. But otherwise, the chat channel is open here on the side too in the Zoom room.
And thank you
Uh,
guys for posting the link I was talking about as well. That's really
yeah,
nice.
we try to capture all of them, and if we missed
Yeah,
any, we'll try to grab it later. But that'll also be included in the video so people can have
lovely.
easy access to that. So speaking of examples, can you give us any
Yeah.
really good examples of ways that people with disabilities have been included at maybe some events you've been to, either online or in person? And then any like really bad ones where you were surprised maybe at some of the
Yeah.
barriers?
Um, Now all my examples are going to be Chicago because that's where I live, and like to think Chicago's a little bit ahead of the game, because we're supposed to be, big city and all. But the Women's March here, I know the women who organize the access part of it, and it is really good. There's a set area in front of the stage where people who have disabilities can sit instead of the standing that's usually happens with these events. You get first access. It's a huge space, and there's interpreters, there's all sorts of wonderful access needs, and that's a big shout out to like Rachel Arfa and all the good work she does with the city and the event planners. And Karen Tamley, who works in the mayor's office, she does a great job with all the festivals. Lollapalooza is massive, massive music festival. And the access they have there is really nice. They have these stages that you can go up. They limit the people on the stages so it's not like overcrowded. There's interpreters at most shows, I think. I would have to be quoted. I don't want to be quoted on that, but those events where there's at least a thought process, like even at Lollapalooza, there's lower counters at certain booths so that people who are in wheelchairs can pay.
So
And it's really nice to have that sort of forethought.
So it sounds like the running thread is that you are planning for these things ahead of time. You're
Yeah,
discussing these things before the event, not during the event or as an
exactly.
afterthought.
Yeah, it's put into the event planning process, and I believe the city of Chicago has these guidelines about it. So any music festival that comes into the city, especially in the parks, uh, is given these guidelines, and I'm not sure if they're required or the suggestions, but it seems lately they've been very much required, at least for big festivals.
So that kind of tags on to the next question that we got in Slack. But so those were events that you were talking about that you were in person, but what about any
Yeah.
online community blockers? Are there any of
Hmm.
those that you can think of?
Like as far as
Maybe some barriers to be included. Maybe the technology that they're using isn't accessible. Or,
oh yeah, personally, the biggest blocker that I've ever seen, aside from let's say no tech involved, nothing like that, it's just knowing about it. So when I
Mhm.
was growing up, there were resources available that my mom knew about through the grapevine. Like they knew coming up through the school system or something, that this was available, that was available, blah blah blah. But, the sports and the extracurriculars for people with disabilities, or even the communities, they get passed down through networks and mouth to mouth, and uh, words, just talking about it. And those are the big barriers, I think, is just knowing what's out there. And I know people who are trying to solve it, but it's still not as relevant, especially for people who are newly injured,
Mm.
or maybe they're new to their disability and they've never been involved in the community,
Mm.
and the only baseline they have is a hospital. And those hospitals are getting a little bit better on educating people on where they can go. But again, that's mainly bigger cities.
So do you think that the advent of like social media and that sort of genre of technology, do you think that that's been very helpful to your community?
Yes, I think it has. I don't speak from personal experience, but I know experience from people who I've known who've been injured later in life.
Mhm.
Social media and finding that connection with your community is really helpful for their recovery and for getting involved in technology and understanding how to do things in a new way. And social media, I mean, Facebook groups are a huge resource for a lot of people I know. And that's one reason they don't even leave Facebook, because their entire community is there. And that definitely helps the information barrier. And that also brings up a whole slew of technology related issues like privacy and, all that fun technology stuff.
Yeah, and speaking of that, James did have a question here too. You wanted to know, do you have a preference for providing tech setup or asking a user to bring their own device? Maybe any pros or cons to each in your experience?
I would say let the user bring their own device unless that's part of the usability.
Hmm.
So if you're testing a new screen reader, then of course you need to use your new screen reader to see how it works, because you're testing the accessibility of the device and how easy it is to learn. But if you're just testing, like, you're working on a website and you want to see how well it works, I think noting what screen reader they're using and what type of setup they're using is good, but letting them do what's natural to them. Maybe they could bring their device and you have a laptop, or maybe they can bring everything. But I think that is probably the best way to go about it, because then you don't have skewed results because they're not used to the technology. And you can also ask them, like, if they feel comfortable using any technology you have, uh, go ahead. If they're like, no, I'd rather use my screen reader, or I'd rather use my device, then that's probably the best way to go about it.
Yeah, that makes sense from even like a scientific point of view because you're trying to limit the variables. So if the new variable
Yeah.
was, yeah, that device, unless like you said, unless you're testing some new device or something. Yeah.
I think I had that in the slide where you need to just be careful what you're testing for. So if you're testing, maybe if it's just new software that's related and you want to see how it works, then obviously you're going to need to like budget some time for them to learn the system and then have them go through it. So
Hmm. That makes sense. And this kind of ties into Charles's question here too. Do you ever name the disability or disabilities in that reporting generated from the results of that kind of user testing?
um
Maybe that's
not
more for internal purposes, maybe on what worked and didn't work, possibly.
I think the best way to go about it is noting what device they use. Okay,
Mhm.
this was a screen reader user. You're not saying this person was blind, because that doesn't really matter. What matters is they were a screen reader user, or what matters was they were using a different type of mouse input device, or they were using one hand to type. That is where I would classify it as. I would not classify it as people who are this disability or that. Now, there is an exception, I think, if you're doing a study based on the disability. So, like in one of my classes, we did currency readers for people who are blind. Now, because them being blind is important to the study, that is noted. But otherwise, if you're just regular old usability testing and you just want to include someone with a disability, there's no need to include their disability.
Okay, that makes sense. That's what it sounds like. Charles says, perfect. That, thank you. That's exactly his approach. Name the need or the input, not the disability itself. I guess one question I would ask though too is like, let's say going back to your screen reader example, someone's using a screen reader, but they're not technically blind, maybe not fully blind. They have low vision, very low vision. So use it as an aid. And so they're getting some visual clues maybe on your website. Would that be maybe a point where you could say combination, right? Where they could, you could say something like, I don't know, visual and assistive technology device use or something. Or is that just like a outlier? Maybe I just made that up.
No. I know I have people who are mostly blind and just have their text really large.
Yeah.
And what I would probably, I've never run into this personally, but probably what I would say is something like, you know, user, their metrics, they have their text sized up to like 100 or something. And, you know, they use this input or that input, or just note, you can note demographics without noting specific disabilities. Like, you don't really need to know how blind they were. You just need to kind of know what they're doing. Like, okay, the user did this, the user did that. They had their screen really zoomed in. They used a magnifier tool, something like that.
All right, that sounds great. One question I missed, I'm going to go back to real quick, but again, a reminder real quick, we're kind of getting closer on the end of the hour. So if anyone has more questions, type it in the chat window. But, you know, you're going back to the question of when people, they're trying to be considerate, but they're kind of unsure to how to go about it. If someone's new, for instance, to the world of accessibility, and makes a mistake, let's say makes a mistake in their coding or their testing or just their interaction with somebody with a disability, how should they go about addressing that?
I'm trying to think of an example.
Mm-hmm.
It really depends on the person you're interacting with, which is like every other human being ever. Like, read the room. If that person is visibly upset, maybe you should apologize. If you're just like freaking out thinking you did something and you're not sure if there's anything wrong, most people will let you know, and you can just do a check-in, like, hey, is everything good? Are we good? That kind of thing. Just and don't treat people like they're glass. Like, it mildly annoys me when people are over helpful, because it's like almost the opposite thing. And that's why I wanted to talk about the history of disability, because it is a very powerful history, and these aren't people who are just hanging out, not doing anything. And, you know, people fought for their rights, and it's a strong community, and they deserve respect like everyone else. And being included in your usability test is just another Tuesday or whatever, you know. It's not some grand happy thing they're doing to make you feel better. Maybe they want the $50 you're offering. Maybe they genuinely want to help you be more accessible, but they should be respected and treated like anyone else. So if you accidentally offend someone who's maybe a different skin color than you or a different orientation than you, I would treat it the same way as a person with disability.
That's perfect. And I love the part in your presentation about the history, because I don't know that everybody knows all of that history.
Yeah, and that was just a basic like run through of photos that I found. There's a whole lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, we did link to a few of those on the Capitol Crawl, the video, and maybe some wiki information. But I guess that would be a good follow-up question as well. Like, where would we get more information? Like, other than in this presentation, what would you suggest for us to do next?
Look into Adapt around your area. They're doing a lot of great protesting radical stuff. Access Living in Chicago, I think they have history out there. If you just Google disability rights history, you'll learn a lot. Drunk History has an episode about the 504 sit-in, which is hilarious.
I did see that one. That is
look that up. You know what's funny is, like, I've been in a wheelchair all my life, and I didn't even know half this stuff. So it is a lot of self-education or finding someone who knows more. So if you have questions, feel free to ask me. I'll probably just Google it myself if I don't know, but I can point you in the right direction.
So you're saying we can Twitter stalk you? Is that what you said?
Yes. And there might be some podcasts on disability history as well.
I'm going to see if I can find some of those links. Since we're chatting now, I can't look that up. Maybe it's Donna if you're listening, but oh yeah, she got the drunk history one. So I like
It's
that
really
one.
funny.
Who was it? Zach Anner, right?
Yeah, yeah, he's a comedian with cerebral palsy. He's
Mhm.
hilarious too. He has this great YouTube channel where he does workout Wednesdays. It's Zach Anner, Anner.
Yeah, I think, yeah. My favorite, when I first was introduced to him, was through a mutual friend of ours, Sarah, who had
Yeah.
posted about his journey in New York to find the magical rainbow
Oh
bagel or
yes.
something. And after that, I was hooked and I had to buy his book. And he was a very interesting guy. So, yeah.
Yeah. Just like how I want to do something similar with Chicago because to get to this one place the other day, I had to take 4 elevators to get to the Brown Line and then down again. And I was just like, if one of these elevators is out, I am screwed.
Yeah, and that's a daily thing for you too. I mean, it's not, I mean, it's funny for us to watch the video of Zach trying to get to his bagel and the example you just gave of trying to get to the brown line or whatever, but it's also kind of annoying and stressful and yeah,
Yeah.
kind of sucks.
And it's it's also interesting in how it affects usability because we were looking at a study in one of my classes about different user groups that reported frustration.
Hmm.
Like they had an interface and they were like trying to measure who gave up first. And the people who gave up first were like sort of middle-aged computer users. The people who gave up last were screen reader users because they're so used to running into problems that they just don't give up that easily. And I feel
Wow.
like that's a metric for the entire disability community where we don't really give up because we're so used to having to just do it a different way that we somehow get it done.
Yeah, no, that's an amazing perspective. And like, I
Yeah.
think that that's goes back to the fragility or the perceived fragility of the
Yeah.
community.
Yeah, like the if someone's agreed to make their way to you to help out, they're probably fine.
Yeah.
They got it.
That's awesome. I mean, this is a lot of really great information. And I don't see any more questions. So I don't know if you wanted to wrap up with any like, um,
They got it. I like the
they
quote.
got it. um,
I say that all the time.
I
I
think
got
that's
it.
what everyone's doing now. They're probably just watching videos now from Zach. But yeah, if you have any last comments for us, otherwise I'll can let y'all go. But I appreciate your time so much today, Liz.
Yeah,
Thank you
no
for
problem.
educating us a little bit on user testing.
Yeah, it's fun to talk about from this perspective of someone with a disability. And thanks for having me today to talk about all this rambling stuff. And I hope that you don't necessarily stop people on the street, but find a disability community to engage with because they're always looking for allies. So, yep.
Awesome. Well, with that, I will see you online.
Thank you.
Talk
Yeah.
to you later. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.